So, language arts, Unit 1, Lesson 9 today, about analyze, style, and tone. So, this is, I see it as related to the point of view, the author's point of view section that we did, because that's going to play a part in determining somebody's point of view is listening to their style and tone and how they speak about a given um, subject that they're talking about. So today's lesson on analyzing style and tone, by the time we complete this lesson, you'll be able to identify and analyze an author's style and then identify and analyze an author's tone, which are linked. Okay. And our audio.
Authors have specific writing styles, or ways in which they use words to communicate thoughts or feelings. An author may use short sentences to emphasize certain ideas, or long sentences to describe a scene or explain information. A style is often determined by the type of writing, the author's purpose, and the audience. For example, the style of a political speech to supporters may differ from one to opponents. Style is closely related to an author's tone, which shows the author's attitude toward the topic. An author's choice of words creates the tone. An author may use words that have strong connotations or meanings beyond their dictionary definitions. For example, a small room, no connotation, might be called a cozy, positive connotation, or a cramped, negative connotation, room.
Yes, so style, like I mentioned yesterday about knowing who the author is. Other questions that you would always want to ask yourself when you are reading a passage or an article or anything, what is the author's purpose? Is it informative? Is it argumentative? Is it, attempt to convince you of a point? And also who the audience is. A lot of stuff we read isn't for students. It was intended for things like Jefferson wrote were intended for maybe the legislative body or other politicians and things of that nature. So that's also important to keep in mind. Is it nonfiction or is it fiction? Those things all have an effect on an author's style and when it's their purpose of writing. And the best writers will mix long sentences and short sentences. You tend to exhaust a reader if you just go with long sentence after long sentence and long paragraph after long paragraph. Using short sentences will help you, add some punch to what you're writing. If you need to make a very direct point, you can use a short sentence. Long sentences are much better for descriptive passages and things like that. And then tone, of course, as you can imagine, is very similar, related to style. And it also clues you in on that viewpoint, how a author writes about something. The word choice is really, really important. And one of the worst things about the English language is that we have so many words for the same thing. A great thing about the English language is that we have so many words for the same thing. And that lends to style and tone because you can describe something in such a different manner just by the word that you choose. And just like they say here, a small room, that just tells you the size of the room. But if you want to add some type of connotation to it, as cozy, right? That's a pleasant place. That's something where you want to be, as opposed to cramped, which is just a different way to describe a small room, but it adds a feeling to it. So, your best writers are going to have that vocabulary. They'll have that in their tool belt to use a particular word and use great word choice to explain something. And so that all goes together with style and tone. So our first piece here is from Barbara Jordan, who's addressing the Democratic National Convention as the keynote in 1976. And this would have been the Democratic National Convention before the election that year, the year that Carter was elected. And the piece says, throughout our history, when people have looked for new ways to solve their problems and to uphold the principles of this nation, many times they have turned to political parties. They have often turned to the Democratic Party. What is it? What is it about the Democratic Party that makes it the instrument that people use when they search for ways to shape their future? Well, I believe the answer to that question lies in our concept of governing. Our concept of governing is derived from our view of people. It is a concept deeply rooted in a set of beliefs firmly etched in the national conscious of all of us. And there's a couple techniques here that talk, that's related to the style and tone. So up here in the text box, the first one, it says the author uses repetition as a style to emphasize the points that follow the repeated words. That one's a little awkward throughout, but that's the example they're using here. And then again, the author's tone emphasizes the Democratic Party as one to which people could turn for change. And she uses that again, that sort of repetition. What is it? What is it about the Democratic Party that makes it the instrument that people use? And this is a great example of speech, right? You're going to write differently for if you're public speaking than you do if you're writing for if you're writing a editorial for a newspaper or an essay or something even in fiction. This really highlights that she's speaking. That these words are meant for a audience, a large audience, like at a gathering. So with that in mind, let's slide over to the quiz. So Unit 1, Lesson 9, we should be on Analyze Style and Tone quiz. Okay, and we'll start this up here. Okay, and starting with that same text again. It says here that when reading a passage, identify the emotions that the words might evoke. You can often determine the tone or author's attitude this way. Having an idea of tone helps you understand the text. So tone, right, is all about your word choice and the words you're using to describe things, just like a small room. If it's a cramped room, the author is telling you that that's a space that you don't necessarily want to be in. If it's a cozy room, then that's a space that's comfortable, it's inviting, right? There's all kinds of words that you can use to describe that, and it tells you something about that. It tells you how the author feels about that. That's what's really important here. How are they feeling about it? By the tone they set, the words they use. So our first question then, in which statement does the language best reflect the author's attitude toward the Democratic Party? So looking at those statements she made, is it A, our concept of governing is derived from our view of people? B, they have often turned to the Democratic Party. What is it? C, well, I believe the answer to that question lies in our concept of governing. Or D, is a concept deeply rooted in a set of beliefs firmly etched in the national conscious of all of us. What statement here best reflects her attitude? What really describes the tone in which she's speaking?
D?
D is in dog. Yeah. So D, and look at the words, right? She uses deeply rooted, is a set of beliefs, beliefs firmly etched in the national conscious of all of us. So D is in dog for number 1. All right. I should click that. All right, D is in dog, number 1. And a new passage here, okay? Again, just like we always do, take note of the title, because that's also going to clue you in. So here it says NBA officiating goes kindergarten. You should start making your wheels turn, what this is going to be about. So it says, while the 2013 NBA playoffs have certainly been entertaining for the thousands of basketball fans across the world, I have found myself constantly turning away from television during many a game. Don't get me wrong, I have loved watching the Golden State Warriors and Denver Nuggets race up and down the court and share the ball. I love how evenly matched and physical the Los Angeles Clippers and Memphis Grizzlies are, and I truly enjoyed watching the Miami Heat and San Antonio Spurs dismantle the Milwaukee Bucks and Los Angeles Lakers, respectively. But every double foul, ridiculous, flagrant, and soft technical that these officials call makes me sick to my stomach. This isn't playoff basketball, it's kindergarten basketball. The National Basketball Association is not a league where everyone deserves equal opportunity and fairness. One guy in a team's locker room can make $16 million and have a locker next to a guy who makes $85,000. But the new NBA officiating rules have been created in order to forge a game where everyone can be safe, where a 6'3" shooter can fearlessly drive at a 7'1" behemoth because he knows he'll be protected by the refs. It's bogus. When you look at documentaries that show basketball from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the game has completely changed. The playoff series between the Knicks and Reggie Miller's Pacers could never happen in today's league. Larry Bird and Dr. J could never have gotten into fights in today's league. Guys like the Bad Boy Pistons, Bill Laimbeer, Kurt Rambis, and Kevin McHale could never exist in today's league, and it's a shame. I will continue to watch the NBA playoffs and be invested in who is crowned the next world champion, but I will also continue to be peeved at this fake brand of officiating. So, in the first sentence of paragraph 3, the author uses the phrase "sick to my stomach." How would the tone of this sentence change if he used just the word "upset" instead? A, the tone would be less upbeat. B, the tone would be more threatening. C, the critical tone would be softened. Or D, the harsh tone would become sarcastic. So changing "sick to my stomach" to "upset." How does that affect the tone? So C.
C.
Yeah, C as in cat, right? It changes the critical tone. It's just sick to your stomach, right? That really emphasizes the point. And adds that, that gravity to what he's saying. Upset, meh, it makes the point, but does it really? It does change the tone, right? It lessens, it softens that critical nature of what he's saying. Okay, and then number 3. So what does the author's word choice in paragraph 3 reveal about his purpose? So real quick, looking at what he says here: every double foul, ridiculous, flagrant, soft technical that these officials call makes me sick to my stomach. So, and then he says this isn't playoff basketball, it's kindergarten basketball. So the author's word choice there for paragraph 3 is he exaggerates his feelings to emphasize his attitude toward playoff officials. B, he uses jargon to show his familiarity with the sport. C, he mentions kindergarten basketball to appeal to elementary school coaches. Or D, he writes in a detached academic style that indicates research and knowledge. A, right? Yeah, he exaggerates his feelings to emphasize his attitudes towards playoff officials. Sick to my stomach, and especially that kindergarten basketball, right? That is really telling you how he feels. And it's what we could say is hyperbole, right? He's exaggerating. That's kind of crazy. But he wants to emphasize those points, so he uses some really strong language there. Okay, so A for number 3. And then in paragraph 5, it only consists of 2 words. It says it's bogus. Again, we talked about using short sentences, long sentences. Well, it's bogus. It's about as short as you can get. So it's really punctuating what he has to say. So which statement best explains the impact of this short paragraph? A, the short paragraph prevents it from having a strong impact. B, the short paragraph and the word bogus emphasize the author's dislike of NBA officiating. C, the word bogus emphasizes the author's frustration with unequal pay. Or D, the short paragraph and the word bogus subdue the angry tone of the passage.
B.
B.
Yeah, B as in boy, right? When you use those short sentences, they really add punch, and that's how you want to reserve them. If you use too many short sentences, your writing is going to be just sort of disjointed, and it doesn't have good flow. But when you stick in those short statements, it could really add some emphasis. So B as in boy for number 4. And then finally for the quiz here, number 5. On the basis of the author's word choice in paragraph 6, which statement best describes his attitudes toward NBA basketball during previous decades, right? So we talked about the 70s, 80s, and 90s up here. So it says he appreciates the playing style, but thinks the players took advantage of lax officiating. He respects the players and playing style, but understands why the game had to change. He is ashamed of the players and the playing style. Or D, he admires the players and idealizes the playing style.
C.
C, it's actually D, right? He talks fairly with some admiration for those players. He mentions that the game's completely changed. The playoff series between the Knicks and Reggie Miller's Pacers could never happen in today's league. So he doesn't ever say that he's ashamed of it, that he does indicate that he does have some respect for those players. So D is a dog for number 5, right? So I'll run through them here, make sure everybody's got them. 1 is D as a dog. That was from Barbara Jordan's Democratic National keynote. 2 is C as in cat. 3 is A. 4 is B as in boy. And 5 is D. 5 is D as in dog. Okay. And we'll move over to a workbook. So on to lesson 9, unit 1. Our workbook, keeping in mind, style best fits the topic, audience, purpose. You want to make sure those things match up whenever you're writing. You consider who your audience is. That was always, I had one professor who really hounded us as grad students, who are you writing for? And when I was writing my master's thesis, he asked me that because you have to defend it, you have to write it, and then you go in and they ask you a bunch of questions about it. He was like, who are you writing this for? And I just want to say, I'm writing it for you 3 people because you're going to pass me. But you have to think largely about who are you writing for. And even in that case, think about what the reader's response is going to be. So audience, topic, purpose. You want to make sure that your style matches that. Whatever you're writing for, if it's informative, if it's argumentative, if it's to convince, if it's any of those. And then, like it says here, a style may be formal, it may be informal, direct, poetic, comic, earnest, or a combination of these and other ways of expression. That's where knowing your audience comes from. If you're speaking in front of Queen Elizabeth, you're going to be formal, right? You're not going to be informal. So things like that to keep in mind. And that goes right along with tone. That's going to help you choose your words and your word choice. So tone shows the reader how the author thinks or feels about that topic, whatever, especially when it comes to your adverbs and adjectives, what you're choosing there is going to relate to your tone. And of course, we do that. We analyze the author's tone by looking at those words chosen. All right. So this is public servants must set an example, and it's also Barbara Jordan. So it's from a different section of her keynote address to the Democratic National Convention in 1976. So let's take a look here. A nation is formed by the willingness of each of us to share in the responsibilities for upholding the common good. A government is invigorated when each one of us is willing to participate in shaping the future of this nation. In this election year, we must define the quote unquote common good and begin again to shape a common future. Let each person do his or her part. If one citizen is unwilling to participate, all of us are going to suffer. For the American idea, though it is shared by all of us, is realized in each one of us. And now, what are those of us to do? What are those of us who are elected public officials supposed to do? We call ourselves public servants, but I'll tell you this: we as public servants must set an example for the rest of the nation. It is hypocritical for the public official to admonish and exhort the people to uphold the common good if we are derelict in upholding the common good. We must hold ourselves strictly accountable. We must provide the people with a vision of the future. And she uses that sort of repetitive language again. We must hold ourselves. We must provide, really strong language for public speaking. And looking at our first underline entry there. So the author uses the words participate and suffer to appeal to the audience's sense of responsibility and patriotism. So these words are an example of the author's style and tone of speech, right? Participating, we all should participate. And when we don't, that leads to suffering. So strong language, especially suffer. And secondly, she says the author is employing a certain style by putting quotation marks around the words public servants. This treatment indicates that she will focus on what the idea of public servants means to her. So, right, thinking about as an elected official, as a public official, we are public servants. So that's a specific word choice, right? And when you hear public servants, you think to serve the public. And that has a definite impact on the tone. All right, so we'll start the workbook. And starting with our public servants must set an example. And it says here, remember that a writer's tone often is connected closely to the style. If a question asks you to identify the author's purpose or reason for writing, you can look at the style and tone for clues. And that goes back to, what we looked at before. If it's, has a lot of humor in it, then, it might be more informal. If it's something that's very fact-driven, it might be informative. And if it's very sort of to the point, it might be like a newspaper article rather than like an opinion piece. Like we talked about opinion pieces and editorials, where you might see that stronger language again, a different tone because of what they're talking about. So looking at our question here, by using the term public servants instead of politicians, the author makes public servants seem A, more interested in winning elections than in serving them, B, less concerned with the present than with a vision of the future, C, more dedicated to the public than to politics, or D, less interested in accountability than in politics.
C.
C, yeah, right to it, C, as in cat. Really, she's pointing that out, right? That they should be dedicated to the public. They are public servants, more to than say their reelection. Okay. And our same piece here. And which word would best describe the tone of the passage? Is it passionate, uncaring, upbeat, or sarcastic?
A.
A.
Yeah, I think we can say that pretty solidly, right? It's a passionate sort of, and that's the other thing too. Are they trying to invoke a response from their audience? Is it an emotional one? And that's certainly something that we see here. Okay, and a new passage. So this is the Thayer Award, I'm going to go ahead and look at that. So this is Douglas MacArthur, who's accepting the Thayer Award, which is an award they give at West Point, the U.S. Military Academy, where he was a superintendent, I think, before World War II. But it's typically goes to members of the military that certain honor for them because they exemplify certain qualities of the military. And this is well after he retired. So it says, no human being could fail to be deeply moved by such a tribute as this, talking about the Thayer Award. Coming from a profession I have served so long and a people I have loved so well, it fills me with an emotion I cannot express. For this award is not intended primarily to honor a personality, but to symbolize a great moral code, the code of conduct and chivalry of those who guard this beloved land of culture and ancient descent. That is the animation of this medallion. For all eyes and for all time, it is an expression of the ethics of the American soldier. The eye should be integrated in this way with so noble an ideal arouses a sense of pride and yet of humility, which will be with me always. Duty, honor, country. Those three hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be. They are rallying points to build courage when courage seems to fail, to regain faith when there seems to be little cause for faith, to create hope when hope becomes forlorn. Unhappily, I possess neither the eloquence of diction, the poetry of imagination, nor that brilliance of metaphor to tell you all that they mean. But these are some of the things they do. They build your basic character. They mold you for your future roles as the custodians of the nation's defense. They make you strong enough to know when you are weak and brave enough to face yourself when you are afraid. They create in your heart the sense of wonder, the unfailing hope of what next, and the joy and inspiration of life. They teach you in this way to be an officer and a gentleman. So in paragraph 1, MacArthur here, the author, describes his country as this beloved land of culture and ancient descent. So what is the tone of this description? Is it professional detachment? Is it B, deep love and respect, C, warlike hostility, or D, judgmental irony?
B.
B. B as in boy, which is a lot coming from Douglas MacArthur because he could certainly show you some warlike hostility. So B as in boy for number 3. 4. So how does the style of paragraph 2 differ from that of the style of paragraph 1? So does it focus on the award, but paragraph 2 focuses on a soldier's duties? B, it contains long patriotic descriptions talking about paragraph 1, but paragraph 2 contains shorter phrases and repetition for emphasis. C addresses the ethics and history of the American people, but paragraph 2 addresses the ethics of soldiers. Or D contains long descriptive sentences, but paragraph 2 contradicts the ideas mentioned in paragraph 1. B as in boy. So yeah, it's long patriotic descriptions in the first one. Talking about, this is war is not intended primarily to honor a personality, but to symbolize a great moral code, the code of conduct and chivalry of those who guard this beloved land, culture, and ancient descent. And then secondly, right, shorter sentences, and then we see some of that repetition dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be. All right, so B as in boy for number 4. 5. After paragraph 1, the author's language becomes more emotional and patriotic. Which statement best explains the reason for that style change? So is it A, paragraph 1 summarizes what the author will address later in the speech? B, paragraph 1 explains why the author lacks eloquence of diction that he refers to and uses later in speech. C, paragraph 1 describes specific details about the qualities or of an officer and a gentleman. Or D, paragraph 1 presents background and introduces the main idea of the speech.
D.
D as in dog. Yeah, you guys are doing really good on this. Okay, D as in dog. And again for the Thayer Award. So how would the meaning of the last sentence change if the author had used the word man instead of gentleman, right? So the very last thing he says there, it says they teach you in this way to be an officer and a gentleman. So is it A, less morally upright and no wiser than ordinary men? B, more likely to be promoted quickly than a gentleman would be? C, less inspired and capable than a gentleman would be in his duties? Or D, weaker and more afraid than a gentleman would be in his duties? So 6.
C.
A, less morally upright, no wiser. That one's a little more subjective, right? Because C's not a bad idea there, less inspired and capable than a gentleman would be in his duties, but more the tone and the content leads more towards A as the correct answer. So A for number 6. Okay, and a new passage here. So this comes from a New York Times article, the Rorschach Chronicles. Okay, if you guys have ever seen a movie or something, the Rorschach test is that big ink blot where they, they'll hold it up in front of somebody and they ask them what they see, and the person will say, "Oh, it's a butterfly," or it's this or that. So anyway, personality testing, modern personality testing which encompasses everything from artsy interpretive exercises like the Rorschach ink blot to exhaustive questionnaires like the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, is a child of 20th century research psychology born of the dream that we can crack the code of human behavior if only we can devise the right set of questions. These tests grew up with the help of modern bureaucracies like corporations and the military. They needed an efficient means of categorizing people by temperament, the better to predict their on-the-job behavior. And yeah, those are still commonly used in a lot of organizations and the military. So it's asked us to drag and drop here into the web the 3 words that most strongly contribute to the tone of the paragraph. So
Artsy.
artsy, okay.
Yeah. Exhaustive.
And, yep, exhaustive.
And diverse or diverse.
Device, yeah.
Device.
Yeah. So yeah, that's it. Artsy, exhaustive, and device. That really speaks to the tone here, and you can kind of see how the author feels about these tests, right? Using that type of language. Okay, and this is I think this is next piece should be from the Margaret Talbot. Yeah, so this is from the same article, right? Different piece. So we already got kind of an idea what's going on and how she thinks about these things. So here it says hooked on testing. And she goes on to say, psychologists have been happy to oblige in this quest, for it has allowed them to indulge in a fantasy of their own. That personality assessment may someday attain the authority and respect of more objective medical tests, helping, in turn, to endow psychology with some of the status of the hard sciences. Indeed, from the 1920s on, the inventors of such tests have resorted to a favorite telltale metaphor from the world of medicine. As a rule, wrote Henry Murray, the Harvard psychologist who invented the TAT, a psychological test in which a person looks at pictures and tells a story about them. In the early 1940s, the subject leaves the test happily unaware that he has presented the psychologist with what amounts to an X-ray of his inner self. For all that, though, personality testing is here to stay, not only because of the many institutions now hooked on it, but also because of the deep human curiosity it promises, however teasingly to satisfy. Long before scientific testing, we tried to classify temperament and character based on the shapes of people's skulls or the color of their humors. Before the Rorschach, a popular 19th century parlor game called Blotto invited players to assess one another's creativity on the basis of their interpretation of ink blots. Leonardo da Vinci used a similar method to judge the imaginative potential of his students. So she's talking about the, sort of the origins of the Rorschach test, and is it as effective at judging people's personalities as it claims to be, if it's been used in various ways for so long. So then here in paragraph 1, the author compares psychology with the quote unquote hard sciences. So what connotation does hard have in this passage? Is it saying it suggests that these sciences are rigid? Is it suggesting that these sciences are more serious than psychology? It suggests that these sciences are based more in reality than psychology is, or it suggests that these sciences are older than psychology. So how is she applying the use of hard sciences here?
B.
B as in boy. So yeah, it's suggesting that they're somehow more serious. You'll hear that from times like hard science, this and that, where it's sort of indicating a more thorough and more even scientific, right? That it adheres more to the scientific method than a discipline like psychology. You'll hear sometimes like fringe science and stuff like that, where it's maybe less ethically engaged. Okay, so A is B as in boy. And here, which statement best applies to paragraph 2? The examples support the author's viewpoint. B, the author changes her mind about testing. C, the tone becomes more emotional. D, the author makes more personal judgments. So for number 9, paragraph 2 does what? So it's A.
A.
Yeah, there you go. A, the examples support the author's viewpoint. So she gets into more specifics about how she feels about the Rorschach test and its origins and things of that nature. All right, so A for number 9. 10, new passage. I'll look down here. So this is from Harper's. It's an article called Nickel and Dimed by Barbara Ehrenreich. That name's familiar. Was that the one who did the Spreading Out yesterday? Maybe. Anyway, so to get into it here, she says, at the beginning of June 1998, I leave behind everything that normally soothes the ego and sustains the body: home, career, companion, reputation, ATM card, for a plunge into the low-wage workforce. I am terrified at the beginning of being unmasked for what I am, a middle-class journalist setting out to explore the world that welfare mothers are entering at the rate of approximately $50,000 a month. 3 days go by like this, and to my chagrin, no one out of the approximately 20 places I've applied calls me for an interview. I had been vain enough to worry about coming across as too educated for the jobs I sought, but no one even seems interested in finding out how overqualified I am. Only later will I realize that the want ads are not a reliable measure of the actual jobs available at any particular time. They are the employer's insurance policy against the relentless turnover of the low-wage workforce. Most of the big hotels run ads almost continually, just to build up a supply of applicants to replace the current workers as they drift away or are fired. So finding a job is just a matter of being at the right place at the right time and flexible enough to take whatever is being offered that day. This finally happens to me at one of the big discount hotel chains, where I go as usual for housekeeping and am sent instead to try out as a waitress at the attached family restaurant. A dismal spot with a counter and about 30 tables that looks out on a parking garage and features such tempting fare as Polish sausage and barbecue sauce on 95-degree days. Philip, the dapper young West Indian who introduces himself as the manager, interviews me with about as much enthusiasm if he were a clerk processing me for Medicare. The principal questions being what shifts can I work and when can I start? I mutter something about being woefully out of practice as a waitress, but he's already onto the uniform. I'm to show up tomorrow wearing black slacks and black shoes. He'll provide the rust-collared polo shirt with Hearthside embroidered on it, though I might want to wear my own shirt to get to work. Ha ha. At the word tomorrow, something between fear and indignation rises in my chest. I want to say, thank you for your time, sir, but this is just an experiment, not my actual life. So she's basically, describing, she's a journalist and she's looking into the workforce. She's, seeing what's out there for lower wage workers, how they're treated and everything. I also want to point out, I mentioned this before. So if you see something like this, brackets, and it says sick, that's the author recognizing that something is misspelled. So she sees that on a menu, right? It should just be one L. She's telling the readers, like, I'm aware that the spelling is incorrect, but this is exactly how it was printed. That's, I mentioned before, brackets are sometimes used as sort of an author inserting themselves into what they're writing. So on here, number 10, which word best describes the author's style in this passage? Is it emotional, argumentative, anecdotal, or mysterious?
A?
It is C.
C.
Yeah, C is in cat. So just in case, anecdotal means, a personal experience. You'll hear it used a lot in terms of anecdotal evidence. So, you may experience something that's not necessarily the norm, or, it doesn't necessarily speak for everybody. So they'll say, well, that's anecdotal evidence. You can't say your situation can be projected on everybody else. Just like if I said, well, everybody hates pineapple on pizza because my family hates pineapple on pizza. That's anecdotal. Nobody should like pineapple on pizza, but some people do apparently, and that would be anecdotal for me to make that claim. So that's just the idea of anecdotal, right? This is her personal experience. It's not necessarily everybody's experience, but as sort of like this investigative journalist, this is somewhat anecdotal. It doesn't have a lot of hard facts behind it. She does have a few here and there. Okay, and then so the author goes on to say, I had been vain enough to worry about coming across as too educated for the jobs I sought. So what does this statement indicate about her attitude? Is she, the author sees herself as below the people she is writing about? B, the author has little experience with the subject matter. C, the author displays a nervous attitude and is uneasy about the topic. Or D, the author displays a sense of humor about herself and is aware that she has things to learn.
I think D.
D is in dog. So, right, she's kind of confessing here, I'd been vain enough to worry about coming across as too educated. She's thinking about her own sort of arrogance, so it's showing a bit of sense of humor and a bit of humility to admit, that she was wrong about that. So D is in dog, and only 2 more here. So 12, the author says that the family restaurant features tempting fare. How would the tone of the sentence change if she had substituted the word food in place of fare, right? So if she'd said tempting food rather than tempting fare. So A, the sentence would not have the same tone of approval. B, the sentence would lose some of its sarcastic humor. C, the tone would be more critical, or D, the tone would be less formal.
I think B as in
B.
boy.
Yeah, B as in boy, right? She's being sarcastic there, tempting fare like Polish sausage and barbecue sauce. She's sort of being saying that sarcastically, and tempting food, yeah, it kind of loses its impact. Fare, right? It sounds kind of like something that you're going to really enjoy. So B as in boy, and that's kind of we're thinking about her tone and her style. The tone throughout is a little bit sarcastic, right? That kind of comes through. And then our final one here, the author describes the manager of the restaurant as the dapper young West Indian. What impact does the word dapper have in the passage? Does it tell you that the writer is attempting to show that she is educated and has an extensive vocabulary? B, it adds an element of politeness and formality to the passage. C, it makes the passage more elegant because dapper has a sophisticated connotation. Or D, it adds an ironic tone because people do not think of family restaurant managers as dapper.
B.
B. Yeah.
Yeah, B is in boy, right? She's kind of being polite here. She's not being as sarcastic when she's talking about this individual person. So B as in boy for 13. And that is our last one. So let's submit our answers here. I'll run through them real quick. Number 1. And there we go. Number 1 is C as in cat. Number 2, A. She had a passionate tone talking to and that also not just looking at the words, consider where she is, who she is. You can start inferring that, okay, she's going to have a passionate speech to these people because it's her people. 3, B, deep love and respect. 4 is B. B as in boy for 4. 5 is D as in dog. 6 is A. And then our little drag and drop web box, right? We had artsy, exhaustive, and device. All right. 7, artsy, exhaustive, device. 8, B as in boy. 9 is A. 10 is C as in cat. Anecdotal, a personal experience. 11 is D as in dog. 12 is B as in boy. 13 is B as in boy. Okay. And so wrapping up here with this lesson, just consider